My name's Harry and I'm a poet. I am a poet who studied maths at university, which means that I used to write poems along the sides of my lecture notes when I was meant to be concentrating. And now that I am a full-time poet, I've ended up reading maths for fun in my spare time, which surprised me more than anyone. And last year I ran a marathon with my mum. And as a poet and a mathematician, two things renowned for their athleticism, I wrote this to help me get through it, and it's called A Mathematician's Guide to Surviving Your First Marathon. Tell yourself the first 5 miles don't really count. By the time you get to 6, stay focused on each checkpoint as they come. 6.214 miles and you have made it to 10K. 6.219 and it's officially 20 miles to go. 6.555 and you are a quarter of the way. At times when things might feel impossible, just stick to what you know. There is a water station up ahead. You are almost at mile 7. Then it is only another half a marathon to mile 20, and then it is only another 6 and a bit until you are allowed to stop. At 7.5 miles, there's only 30K remaining. At 8 miles, make a joke to yourself about Eminem. Soon, you will have made it to 13 kilometers, which means that if kilometers were miles, you would pretty much be at the half-point way already. Which means you are only 1.6 times your current distance. This means that is 5/8 of the way there, which means you are currently 5/16 of your way to the total difference. Tell yourself not to dwell on the fact that 5/16 doesn't feel like very much. Instead, concentrate on the giant carrot that has just overtaken you. Challenge yourself to keep it within eyesight for the next 500 meters. This will take you to the 8.73 mile mark. This is approximately 1/3 of the total distance. This means once you do this distance again, it would just be this distance till the end, and you know that you can manage this distance because you have just done it. Plus, 1/3 feels way bigger than 5/16. If you carry on like this, you may just make it to the finish. The important thing is not to overthink it. My journey with poetry and maths started around 10 years ago. There was a Battle of the Bands competition at my school, and whilst most of my friends performed covers of their favourite rock songs, me and my friend Luke decided to rewrite Jay-Z's 99 Problems to make it 99 Problems But Maths Ain't One, complete with an 80-digit pi solo. It was incredible. I think it's on YouTube. And I then performed this rap at a poetry open mic night, and I was asked if I would perform at a poetry night where the theme was going to be prime numbers. And I said, of course, that sounds incredible. And at this poetry night, it was amazing because most of the other poems sort of felt like rhyming Wikipedia articles about these numbers. But for me, age 17, I loved prime numbers because they were the ones that didn't quite fit in with the patterns people understood. And the idea of not fitting in and being 17 meant that I could relate to prime numbers in more ways than one. And I read this poem at the first TED Talk that I did, and it's part of the reason why I'm able to be here today. And so 8 years on, last year I turned 25. And so whilst not quite in my prime, still a little bit odd, and possibly slightly square, I decided to try and write a follow-up. So this is a poem for squares, and it's called 49. 49-year-old man, not exactly well-rounded. Always tried to leave everything as he found. Things could be nice and neat with the stuff he controlled. It only ever got messy when there were others involved. His hobbies included his N64. He'd been tempted by GameCube but wasn't quite sure. With his shreddies, he'd go through Sudoku each morning and by night could binge watch a box set till dawn. She was 72. She heard time after time as a woman that she should be well past her prime, but just last year she'd thrived hitting 71, and next year again she'd enjoy proving them wrong. She grew up in a house of 4 brothers. As young as 16, she had looked after others, remembering what her mum said about numbers: when one does what one does, one can cause wonders. In his flat, things were neatly aligned on the shelves. He didn't just follow rules, but he liked them as well. He realized at this point in life that he felt it was easier spending these times by himself. Half her lifetime ago, she'd been in his position, a square that's too scared to step outside the box. But she realized at this point in her life that she figured, you squeeze what you can out the time that you've got. She knew that she needed a plan, some way to go about reaching the man. And given his nature, she'd have to start slow, but with squares, it's amazing how quickly things grow. 9 o'clock the next morning, shreddies in hand. He noticed the note as it entered his flat. Her tentative plan from the previous night laid out in her neatest handwriting. It read, "We could live out our lives as two parallel lines, or we could find the right angles to meet. So if you're in need of a decent square meal, how do you feel about dinner next week?" These 36 words left him speechless at home. A yearning was stirred somewhere deep in his bones, and once seeds have been sown, if you leave them alone, sometimes all they need is a reason to grow. And this was the meal that she chose. She preheated the oven, 360 degrees. Almost 361, it would flicker between. No need for a main, instead just 4 sides, all equal length in their preparation time. Homemade ravioli she'd carefully cut, laid out on some toast she had spared of its crusts, a packet of noodles she'd subtly warmed, or they're not heating up long enough to lose form, 4 3x3 waffles, arranged in a grit, topped with fake plastic cheese on a savory tip. Then she cracked out the crackers, and there in a box, some squares she had got of some various chalk. And as he took it all in, he was so overwhelmed. He had no idea how to show how he felt, as if words weren't enough in this place to just be. All she made him agree was to the same the next week, and this became their routine, as his straight edges softened with Battenberg, baklava, ice by the cube. The thing is with breaking down squares is that often it just takes some effort to find the right route. And food is a miracle to those who would share it. It just takes some faith in the ones who prepare it, whether for a few or 4,900. When one does what one does, one can cause wonders. And one day, as they ate, what he'd stored up inside found its way to escape in the warmth of the silence. He said, "I'm so grateful, but I have to know why it was me, of all people, you chose to show kindness." She smiled and says, "Think of this jelly we hold. There's so much potential that's yet to unfold. Somehow, only when we can let it dissolve will it spill out and fill out the rest of its mold." And so it was so. Such that 72 seed of friendship she'd sown exponentially grew. Though I guess there were clues that collectively summed, they'd find a way to connect 1 to 1, so they kept it 100. Their strength was in numbers. Together there's nothing that they couldn't do. Because when one does what one does, one can cause wonders. You can only imagine the power of two. And so that poem has an epilogue, and I use that term loosely because what I mean is that I got carried away. And I had so much fun writing it, and I wanted to try and fit all the square numbers up to 100 in and a few more, and I managed to get most of them in apart from 2. One was 81, which is fine because that poem as it stands is exactly 81 lines long. And the other one was 25, and I realized that the whole point that I wrote the poem in the first place was that I turned 25, and I wanted to acknowledge the nudges of kindness that I'd been given that had got me that far. So I wanted to include 25, but I didn't want to ruin that it was 81 lines long. So rather than it being a poem that is 97 lines long, it is a poem that's 81 lines long with an epilogue that is 16 lines long. But it's basically the same poem. And the last bit goes like this. Fast forward 9 months. She turned 73. Once again in her prime, like she said she would be. He's about to hit 50, he's having a do. She convinced him by saying she'd handle the food, which only left the question of the guest invites, whether his 25-year-old nephew might attend the night. You see, he recognized in him that need to fit into place. It is incredible the difference Ian makes. It felt like half a lifetime ago, he'd been in his position, a square that's too scared to step outside the box. But he realized at this point in life that he figured, even if a door seems closed, you might as well knock, or at least post a note in a well-chosen moment. When words can melt walls, well, it seems only fair that he'd carefully chosen to share what she'd showed him and wrote in P.S. Be there or be square. So I mentioned at the start I ran a marathon, and I ran a marathon with my mum, and I ran a marathon with my mum because she's amazing. She loves running, and 3 years ago, when I was doing my final year maths exams, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And as a way of retaining some agency and control in a way when it was being taken away from her, she decided that she would try and run to every single one of her chemotherapy appointments. And various members of family and friends ran with her, and she made a blog about this, and then that blog got turned into a book, and then she asked me if I would write a poem for the book launch. And for me, poetry was a way of playing with words, the same way maths was about playing with numbers, and it was kind of a distraction on the side before it came a way to see the world, a different lens to see things through. But I still found it very difficult because for me, poems make things permanent, and I wasn't sure I was ready to make this permanent. But I was able to write this when I realized that the word chemotherapy has the word mother in the middle of it. So I wrote this, and it's just a short poem, and then I got one more to finish. But it goes like this. There is a mother in the middle of chemotherapy. Sitting at the end of reason is a son. But there is a treat at the beginning of each treatment. In amongst the brunt of everything, I run. For me, I realize now that I was a poet long before I decided to try and do it full time and struggle to find it on the drop-down list of jobs in multiple choice forms. And I remain a mathematician long since struggling through my final end-of-year exams. And I realize now that these are not things to be kept on the side, but things that sort of make me who I am and to be celebrated and embraced. Because for me, not only has maths helped me get through a literal marathon, it helped my awkward 17-year-old self and still awkward 25-year-old self find a way to express themselves in a way I didn't know was possible, and even indirectly come to terms with a family cancer diagnosis. And I think if we can't begin to embrace these things in ourselves, for me it's poetry and maths, for you it may be something completely different. But if we can't celebrate and embrace them in ourselves, then what hope do we give other people? Which leads me to my final poem, because recently, in the space of a week, 2 different mums came up to me and told me that their child was being bullied at school and asked me if I had any advice for them. How do they deal with it? Would that happen to me? And my first thought was, why would you assume that I was bullied at school? But if you've paid attention to the rest of this talk, you'll realize that I was. Like just a bit. But one of these was my aunt, and I wrote this for my cousin, but I also wrote it for a younger version of myself, and for anyone who's ever been made to feel small in any way, for being different in any kind of way. Because whilst at 17 I was worried about fitting in, for me what makes us stand out feels far more exciting these days. So I wrote this in an effort to try and answer the questions that I know I had back then, and that other people may as well. And it's just called Maybe, and it goes like this, and then I'll finish. But thank you so much for having me. It goes like this. Maybe it's because they don't understand you. Maybe it's because they do, and they're afraid of what they see. Maybe it's because you are not normal. Maybe normal is not the thing you need to be. Maybe today will be a good day. Maybe today feels like it's way too close to call. Maybe one day you will look back and laugh at this. Maybe one day you will not look back at all. Maybe it feels like it's getting harder. Maybe you're still waiting for that day to come around. Maybe it's because I'm a Londoner. That I believe you can't stop building bridges just because one is falling down. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy. But maybe you're going to be the one that saves me. After all, you are wonderful. Right now, this feels like everything. Right now, it always is. It's only afterwards that we can see there's more than this. You can be informed by this without being formed by this, just as a calm before the storm, there is a dark before the dawn in this. Whoever told you must shrink to fit in got their filter wrong. We are not sculptures to be chipped away, but platforms to be built upon. So if somehow this changes you, let it be in a resilience in knowing that you made it through. Do not give them an inkling of a thicker skin. If we stop listening, how can the truth that permeates start sinking in? Not every day is a battle. Not every part of life's a war. It is the times that lie between that need to be worth fighting for, so remember what this moment is. You may not have chosen this, but one day you will be someone who rose from it. When you see the same in others, you can show them this, so notice this, there's no eclipse without some kind of glow in it. Those that know you know to love you. Those that love you love to know you. Those that don't, they forfeit the right to get to be the ones that mold you. And if you ever meet the old you, say, I come from what you go through. There will be times when that is all you have to hold to. There will be times you cannot help but cry, and times you cry for help. There will be times where you resist or are too tired to rebel, when it takes everything to not just be defined by someone else. You can start by showing kindness to yourself. Thank you very much for having me.